Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda
Krishna Chaitanya
Prabhu Nityananda
Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda
Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda
Shri Krishna
Chaitanya
Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Sivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda
Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Jaya Shri
Krishna
Chaitanya
Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara
Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Jaya Shri Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hari Bol Hari Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna Krishna Hare Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Hare Rama 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 Hare Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Jai, Om, Vishnupada Paramahamsa, Paribrajak Acharya, Ashtotarasta Shishimanas Divine Grace, A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Shami, Maharaj Prabhupada ki jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrinda ki jai, ISKCON founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Nav Acharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki jai, प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवास आदि गौर भक्तवृंद की जय। श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंद राधा कुंद गिरि गोवर्धन की जय। वृंदावन धाम की जय, नवद्वीप धाम की जय, गंगा माई की जय, जमुना माई की जय, तुलसी देवी की जय, भक्ति देवी की जय, Shramaveta Bhaktavrinda ki jai. Gaur Premanande. All glorious to the assembled devotees. All glorious to the assembled devotees. All glorious to the assembled devotees. All glory to Shri Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga Hari Hari. Namaste Saraswati Deve Namaste Narasimhaya.
Namaste Narasimhaya.
Namaste Narasimhaya.
Namaste Narasimhaya.
Prahlad Dayine.
Prahlada Lada Dahi.
Shila Kankanakari. Ito Nrisingha Parato Nrisingho.
Ito Nishinha Parato Nishinha.
Jato Jato Javitato Nrisingha.
Yato Yato Yamitato Nishinha.
Bahir Nrisingho Hridaye Nrisingho.
Mahena Shinha Hridayena Shinha.
Nrisinghamading Sharanam Prapadye.
Narasingamadim Sharanam Prapade.
Nrisimhamadim Sharanam Prapadye.
Narasingamadim Sharanam Prapade.
Abakar Kamala Pare Nakam Adbhuta Singam Sarita Hiranya Kashipu Tanu Bringa Ishava Drita Narahari Rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Adbhuta Shrina Dorita Hiranyakashipu Tanu Bringa Shabbatita Narahari Dupa Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Krishna Bhagavan ki Jai.
Hare Krishna, welcome.
Hare Krishna.
Welcome to all the devotees joining us via Zoom and YouTube, as well as devotees that are gathered here at ISKCON Philadelphia to join us for our Sunday feast program. Thank you to Vishnu Gada Prabhu for leading us in a beautiful kirtan and glorification of the Lord. Tonight we have with us a very, very special guest, Her Grace Malati Devi Dasi. Mother Malati, she is one of the senior disciples of Srila Prabhupada. She was initiated by Srila Prabhupada in 1967, and she is a pioneer in the Hare Krishna movement, pioneering in the, she joined in San Francisco. Later, she was one of the first devotees to go to London and spread the Krishna consciousness movement there, and as well as going with Srila Prabhupada to India and help spreading the Hare Krishna movement there as well. She's a member of the governing body commission, the GBC, since 1998, and she travels extensively throughout the world, not so much now during COVID, but she travels teaching about Vaishnava culture and educating people on the qualities of Srila Prabhupada and spreading the Krishna consciousness movement. We're very, very thankful that she joined us today. It's been, I think, a couple months since she's been with us. And how are you doing, Mother Malati?
Hare Krishna, nice to see you and all the other wonderful faces, Haryasha, Haribol, and others who are present. And also, it was really nice to hear that you actually have people in presence in the temple now, right?
Yeah, we have a couple
In
people
person
here.
in the temple?
We distribute prasadam every Sunday to about 100 people. They come and they pick it up. We pack it for them. So that is an effort to arrange for that. So we have people packing prasadam, cooking the prasadam, preparing it, and then we have some people here listening to class as well and doing kirtan. So before we begin, I want to give you a quick darshan of Srila Prabhupada and the deities.
Yes, thank you. Jai Srila
His Divine
Prabhupada.
Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada ki.
Jai.
Shishi Gaur Nitai ki.
Jai. Hari Bol.
Sorry, I'm zooming in and zooming out there. Shri Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Maharani ki.
Jai.
Shishi Radha Sharad Bihari ki.
Jai. I'm still remembering that wonderful day when they were transferred from their old quarters to the new temple extension.
Yes.
It was, you know, in the other little room, everything was really tightly packed up, and they were tightly packed up. And I was thinking, you know, when I looked in the new extension, how everything was just so large, and I was thinking, how is that going to be? You know, there's everything so small coming in this big, large new space. But the most amazing thing for me was when they entered that new space and were placed in the altar, it's as if they also expanded in size and everything was fitting perfectly.
Jai, thank you for that remembrance. Yeah, we've been, I think it's about a year and a half. Actually, it was in December. So coming up, it'll be 2 years in December.
Okay.
Right. Okay, we'll hand it over to you. And would you like to chant Jai Radha Madhava?
So that with you, that's not.
Oh no, we'll put just 1 second. We'll mute the.
Yep.
1 second.
चालू करो ना टाइम पे पहुंची जान एकदम दर्शन करने एकदम निकल आओ ताकि सब कक्षा
1 second. We'll mute.
और तो सर 8 साढ़े 8
Give me 1 second.
फिर कपड़ा चेंज करो फिर बाहर निकल कर मुक्ता लोग में बात न करा प्रसाद ले आओ ना बहुत लोग में बात करना हो तो कहीं आसो नहीं कहीं नहीं कह सकता है बात कर
I'm sorry, everybody will be muted now. I apologize for that.
I have a question about your format. I can't remember what it was last time. Do you chant Jai Radha Madhava as part of the program, or do you just launch into the verse?
Most of the speakers chant Jai Radha Madhava,
Okay.
but the call and response, as I guess you know by now, is a little awkward in Zoom. So what we'll do is, you can chant. I'll have everybody else on mute, but just to, I guess, enter into the mood, and then we'll put the verse up on the screen for you.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, well, for the pleasure of their most beautiful, auspicious lordships and Srila Prabhupada, we can chant Jai Radha Madhava. And even though you're all on mute, you can also chant anyway. So. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Baba Vidhyavali Yasoda Nandana Pradana Yasoda Nandana Pradana Yasoda His divine grace. A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. This from BBT Phenomena Acharya, His divine Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Grantaran Srimad Bhagavati Gita Ki Jai. Lord, you know what that noise is about? Now it's stopped, so okay. Hare Krishna. So this is Srimad Bhagavad Gita, 2nd chapter, text 55. Oops, okay. It's on your screen, but just 1 minute because I'll get that out of the way so I can see it. So that means you're going to move it like, wait a minute, how does this happen here? Okay.
Yes. Yeah, we'll move it as we go down.
Okay. Anyway, I have it on my computer too. And I don't know, I just got a message that on my screen that goes, your internet is unstable. And I hope it doesn't go out, but maybe what you could do, because sometimes it does that, goes out. If you could text me a call-in number, just in case it does go out, then I can just, call in on a phone. Usually with Zoom, they do have call-in numbers, right? Hello?
Yes, I'll do that.
Okay, so just, so I have that backup just in the case. Okay, Hare Krishna. So this is text 55, and before chanting the verse, I will just do the word by word and translation, because it's that way you kind of have an idea about the context of the verse. Sri Bhagavan Vacha, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, said, Prajahati gives up, yada, when, kaman, desires for sense gratification, sarvan, of all varieties, partha, Sanaprita, managatam, of mental concoction, atmani, in the pure state of the soul, eva, certainly, atmana, by the purified mind, tushta, satisfied, sthita pragya, transcendently situated, tada, at that time, uchyate, it is said. Sri Bhagavanu Vacha, Prajahati Yada Kaman, Sarvan Patamanogatam, Atmanyari Vatmana Tushta, Shrita Pragyastadochyate. Translation by His Wonderful Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. The Blessed Lord said, O Partha, when a man gives up all varieties of sense desire which arise from mental concoction And when his mind finds satisfaction in the self alone, then he is said to be in pure transcendental consciousness. The purport by His Divine Grace. The Bhagavatam affirms that any person who is fully in Krishna consciousness or devotional service of the Lord has all the good qualities of the great sages, whereas a person who is not so transcendentally situated has no good qualifications, because he is sure to be taking refuge in his own mental concoctions. Consequently, it is rightly said herein that one has to give up all kinds of sense desire manufactured by mental concoction. Artificially, such sense desires cannot be stopped. But if one is engaged in Krishna consciousness, then automatically sense desires subside without extraneous efforts. Therefore, one has to engage himself in Krishna consciousness without hesitation, for this devotional service will instantly help one onto the path of transcendental consciousness. The highly developed soul always remains satisfied in himself by realizing himself as the eternal servitor of the Supreme Lord. Such a transcendently situated person has no sense desires resulting from petty materialism. Rather, he remains always happy in his natural position of eternally serving the Supreme Lord. Once again, the Blessed Lord said, O Partha, when a man gives up all varieties of sense desire which arise from mental concoction, and when his mind finds satisfaction in the self alone, then he is said to be in pure transcendental consciousness. So, okay. Are we still connected here?
Yes.
Okay, somehow I've lost your screen. Never mind. Om Agyan Timirandasya Zanana Sakalaya Chakshu Militam Yena Tasme Sri Gurave Namaha Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Nityanamane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paskachidya Satarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vancha Kalpa Turubhishta Kripa Sindhu Aevyacha Patitanam Pavanevyo Vaishnavevyo Namo Namaha. So somehow your screen has disappeared. Zoom. Maybe okay, found it. So this chapter 2 is like, I was thinking kind of a mundane thought, but I was thinking if the Bhagavad Gita was a baseball game, chapter 2 would be like a quadruple home run with all the bases filled. Like, so, the 3 bases, and there would be players on each base, and then the next player comes up and he hits a home run. And then, so there's 4 home runs, everybody gets to run home. And it's like a great celebration. So this chapter 2 gives extraordinary insight and depth and instructs us in self-realization by analytical study of the material body and the spirit soul, as explained by the Supreme Authority, Lord Krishna. And this realization is made possible by being situated into fixed conception of the real self. So it just is, if we had to maybe pick one chapter to guide us through our life, this would probably be a good one to pick, although Prabhupada has explained that just like in the case of the Bhagavatam, he said, anywhere you open, he said, it's like sugar candy. Wherever you bite, it's sweet. So wherever you open, it is sweet. And we can certainly apply that to the Bhagavad Gita, but in particular, the 2nd chapter, especially for those of us who are probably born in less than enlightened situations. Everything is there that we need to hold ourselves together spiritually, to come to the highest level of Krishna consciousness. All the instructions are there, very clear language. And it explains how the, like a little brief overview, that the Sanskrit word Bhagavan is explained by the great authority Parasara Muni, who was the father of Vyasadeva. Now we know Vyasadeva was the compiler of the Vedic literature. And we also know that after he compiled the Vedic literature, he was feeling what was described. He was feeling morose. And he wasn't feeling satisfied. Well, sometimes we also have that experience. We've been chanting for a few decades. It almost feels like a few centuries, and we haven't come to the highest level of enlightenment. We're still fighting to get our rounds done, fighting our mind, fighting our senses. And Vedavyas, he had conquered his senses. He wasn't having these kind of, beginner's luck troubles, but he wasn't feeling satisfied. And his spiritual master, Narada Muni, appeared on the scene, and he detected this moroseness. And he explained to him, well, you've done this great work, but you have really, even though you're mentioning Krishna here and there, you haven't given a precise connection to Krishna. He's just, mixed up among all the other Vedic information and knowledge. And not all of that knowledge and information is particularly based on transcendence. While it's, intended eventually to lead one to that level, it's the clear connection to Krishna had not been established. It wasn't there. And thus the Srimad Bhagavatam resulted from that, because he was ordered to produce this literature, which became known as the creme de la creme, the cream of all Vedic literature. So this is Vedavyas, and he explained that the Bhagavan, the Supreme Personality who possesses all riches, all strengths, all fame, all beauty, all knowledge, and all renunciation, that person is Bhagavan. So of course there's always going to be rich people, powerful people, beautiful people, famous, learned, etc., detached people, but no one can claim all of these opulences in full or in entirety. Krishna can make this claim because he is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And there comes a point where Prabhupada mentioned in the purport, explained about the word Aryan. And this word Aryan is applicable to persons who know the value of life and have a civilization based on spiritual realization. Now there is these pseudo societies and organizations, so-called Aryan organizations, but they're based on misapplication of what is Aryan, and they're not at all connected with spiritual realizations. So Prabhupada explained, people who are led by the material conception of life, they don't know the aim of life is realization. But the Aryan terminology, the Aryan principle is applied to persons know values of life and have a civilization based on spiritual realization. And the persons who have no knowledge of liberation from material bondage, these persons are non-Aryan. We have these, white supremacist people and bodily identifying people who term themselves Aryan, but it's actually completely bogus and demeaning. So, although Arjuna, who we know he was having a big conflict about whether or not he should fight, he was a Kshatriya. And then he was non-Aryan. He was apparently deviating from his prescribed duties in this declining fight, even though he was giving so many wonderful reasons. I remember when Prabhupada was first describing this, how Arjuna didn't want to fight, and I was listening, 1967, early 67, and that whole issue with the war at Vietnam. So all the reasons of Arjuna didn't fight actually sounded pretty good to most of us, except Prabhupada just cut it down and presented a whole different paradigm. So Prabhupada described this act of cowardness, declining to fight, even though by his prescribed duty as a Kshatriya, he should be fighting. He described that as befitting the non-Aryans. And he goes, and such a deviation, it won't help one in the progress of spiritual life. So all the Vedic literatures are advising to approach a bona fide spiritual master to get free from the perplexities of life, which happen without our desire, without our request. It's described, they're like a forest fire that somehow blazes without being set by anyone. Of course, nowadays we have the unfortunate incidents where people actually do intentionally set fires, which is most unfortunate. But still, the situation is that the perplexities of life, they automatically appear without our wanting such confusion. We don't really want a fire, but they take place. And, like we know what's going on in the West Coast. Recently was just the whole West Coast seemed like one inferno, one hell, and become perplexed. So the Vedic wisdom therefore advises that in order to solve these perplexities of life, we have to understand the science of the solution. And one must approach a spiritual master who's in the disciplic succession. And a person with a spiritual master is supposed to know everything. So one should not therefore remain in material perplexities. So then question, well, who is a man in material perplexities? And it's described that he who does not understand problems of life. And in the Garga Upanishad, there's a description of a perplexed person, that he is a miserly person who does not solve the problems of life as a human, and who thus quits this world like the cats and dogs, without understanding the science of self-realization. So this human form of life, it's a valuable asset for the living entity who can utilize it for solving the problems / perplexities of life. And one who doesn't utilize this opportunity is considered a miser. In general, we think of a miser as somebody who's hoarding money, hoarding different things. But the definition given by Prabhupada and throughout the Vedas is that one who does not properly utilize this human form of life and therefore wastes. So that type of person is a miser. And then on the other hand, there's a Brahmana, and that person is intelligent enough to utilize this body to solve all the problems of life. If one is saying he's a Brahmana, but he's still engaging in nonsense and is acting as a miser, it means not a Brahmana. So the academic knowledge or scholarship, high position, etc., they're all useless in solving the problems of life. And the help can only be given by a bona fide spiritual master like Krishna. So Arjuna was in front of Krishna, totally having a meltdown. And he was about to become enlightened. And in fact, he was. So the conclusion is the spiritual master is one who's 100% Krishna conscious. And that person can solve the problems of life. And Lord Chaitanya said that one who is a master in the science of Krishna consciousness, regardless of his social position, that is the real spiritual master. In other words, it's not based upon academic achievements or social distinction or rank or one's ashram. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Lila, it is explained that it doesn't matter whether the person is a Vipra, a learned scholar in Vedic wisdom, or born in a lower family, or in the renounced order of life. But if he's the master of the science of Krishna, he/she is a perfect and bona fide spiritual master. So the talk was going on between intimate friends, namely Hrishikesh and Gudakesh, meaning Krishna and Arjuna. And as friends, both of them in the friendships, they were on the same level. But then there was that shift, and one of them voluntarily became the student of the other. And it was described at one point, Krishna was smiling, and he was smiling because a friend had chosen to become a disciple. That shift had occurred. And as Lord of all, Krishna is always in the superior position as the master of everyone. And yet the Lord accepts one who wishes to be a friend or a son or a lover or a devotee or who wants him in such a role. But when he's accepted as the master, then he at once assumes the role and talked with the disciple like a master, with gravity, as is required. In other words, the nonsense, joking and laughing and frivolity that may be there in friendship was suddenly sidetracked, put aside, and now the gravitas appeared. And it appears that the talk between the master and the disciple was openly exchanged in the presence of both of the armies. So that means everybody there on the battlefield was benefited. So this means that the talks of the Bhagavad Gita are not for any particular person or society or community, but they're for everyone, for friends, for enemies who are equally entitled to hear them. And sometimes people may think, Bhagavad Gita, it's not for advanced people. And like in the first chapter, they start listing all the names of the generals who were there and the different participants, and why should we have to chant the names of these people? But everybody and everything in the Bhagavad Gita is connected to Krishna. And therefore, everything in the Bhagavad Gita is there to help us also to become connected to Krishna. There's nothing mundane about any part of the Bhagavad Gita. And all those generals and all those soldiers on the battlefield, they were all connected to Krishna. They were there by Krishna's desire. So then there was that wonderful verse, Krishna's listened to Arjuna's lamentations, his complaints. And then he goes, well, speaking learned words, you are mourning for what it is not worthy of grief. Those who are wise lament, neither for the living nor the dead. There are so many key verses in this second chapter. That is definitely one of them. But knowledge of the soul, knowledge of matter, soul and the supreme, It's even more important than any religious formalities or other formalities of society. And the Supreme Personality of Godhead is also, by his plenary expansions, alive in the heart of every living entity. But generally, only saintly persons can see within and without that same Supreme Lord, and they can actually attain perfect and eternal peace. You know, there was a famous verse that this is from the purport where never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings. So much knowledge and information, unless one is actually really convinced about becoming Krishna conscious, it can sometimes just become almost poetical words. But we want more than poetry. We want actual Krishna consciousness, self-realization. The Mayavadi theory that after liberation, the individual soul is separated by the covering of Maya or illusion, which will merge into the impersonal Brahman, so this is Mayavadi point, and lose the individual existence, is not supported by that verse, by this verse, the 12th verse. And Krishna makes that very clear, in Krishna, the supreme authority. And he's saying that in the future, the individuality of the Lord and others will continue eternally. And Prabhupada in the purport said this statement of Krishna is authoritative because Krishna cannot be subjected to illusion. And if individuality was not a fact, then Krishna would not have stressed it so much. So the plurality of the individual soul and of the Lord is an eternal fact. This is confirmed in the Vedas, and the living entities are always subject to the Supreme Lord, as in the case of master and servant, or the teacher and the taught. If you go to school and you sit there thinking you know equally or more than the teacher, then there's not going to be an exchange of learning. You know, so understanding the role of Krishna, the Supreme Lord, and our reduced individuality is very important. And this clear knowledge is impossible to understand under the spell of ignorance. And by and large, most conditioned living entities are bewildered by the influence of illusory energy, and as such, under the spell of ignorance to some degree or another. So in order to drive away, to fully dispel such ignorance, the Lord is teaching Bhagavad Gita for the enlightenment of all entities for all time. Now, the soul has been described as a minute automatic particles of the spiritual whole. And one time Prabhupada, in one lecture, he gave a very nice description, which I was trying to find that today. I have it in some notes, but I couldn't find it. But he described the soul, scintillating, shining molecular particle. In other places, he described his soul as being evergreen. But that is us, these small, minute atomic particles of the whole spirit of the Supreme Lord. So just like in the sunshine, there's innumerable radiant molecules, and similarly, the fragmental parts of the Supreme Lord are atomic sparks of the rays of the Supreme Lord, are the superior energy. So Prabhupada commented that neither Vedic knowledge or modern science denies the existence of the spirit soul in the body. People understand that when the soul is gone, the life force is gone, then that's just a dead body. I was reading something yesterday from Bhagavatam, and Prabhupada gave this expression. So the living entity, he's embodied living entity, and he's flapping around for a few days. I was describing the light, flapping around, and then the soul leaves, and then you have a dead body, and people are spending so much energy to decorate a dead body. In other words, he said, from the beginning of birth, that's the beginning of death. So the body is alive due to the presence of the soul, but actually without knowledge of the soul, without the understanding of the soul, we are simply decorating a body doomed for death. In other words, wasting our time. So as the sunlight maintains the entire universe, so the light of the soul maintains this material body. And as soon as the spirit soul leaves the body begins to decompose. And the living entity, although the living entity is not killable, Prabhupada used this term, the living entity is not killable because of the spiritual constitution. And yesterday I was giving Bhagavatam class and somebody was asking me about the size of the soul. So we know that, okay, 1/10,000th of the tip of a hair. But this person was wanting to know, well, what are the dimensions of that 1/10,000th of the tip of the hair? It was an interesting question. But then today when I was reading through the second chapter, the answer came. The soul is so small that no one has any idea how to measure its dimension. And that small, unmeasurable soul is keeping our bodies alive, the body of an elephant alive, the body of a huge giant tree alive, the body of a minute little living entity, an insect, a plant, a creeper, just this tiny little shiny molecular particle. And the same little shiny molecular particle, the soul, is full of knowledge or is full always with consciousness. So therefore the consciousness is a symptom of the soul. So even if one is, we know the soul is situated within the heart, but even if we don't find the soul within the heart, sometimes people try to figure things out by, I remember when they had the first heart transplant. So somebody was asking Prabhupada about, is this even possible and what happens to the soul? And, Prabhupada was not so concerned with such details. The soul is there in the body, within the heart. And if the heart gets changed, the soul can also change into the new heart, in essence. So even if we don't find the soul within the heart where he's situated, one can still understand the presence of the soul simply by the presence of consciousness. Just like sometimes we find that we look out the window in the morning and we don't see any sun due to clouds or for some other reason, but still the light of the sun is present and we know that therefore it's daytime. And in the same way, there's some level of consciousness in all bodies, all living entities, whether man, animal, trees, aquatics, birds, etc. We understand that there's a presence of the imperceptible soul. And we understand there's two kinds of souls, the minute particle, the Anum Atma, and the Vibhu Atma, the super soul, and that the conditioned soul is bewildered by so-called education, which is simply rearranging various aspects of the material energy and trying to control them. Our modern education is neglecting to give knowledge of the most important, valuable aspect of life, which is knowledge of the soul. So when Krishna orders fighting, then it has to be understood that such violence is for the supreme justice. And as such, Arjuna should follow those instructions, knowing well that this violence, such violence committed is on behalf of Krishna's orders. So it's not really violence at all because the soul cannot be killed, but it's rather for administrational justice. Just like a surgical operation isn't meant to kill the patient, but to cure him. So this fighting to be executed by Arjuna at the instruction of Krishna is with full knowledge so that there would be no possibility of sinful reaction. Although one should not use this as an excuse to harm, injure, or kill other living entities. The specific situation here was directly at the order of Lord Krishna. So Also from this chapter, we learned how the Katha Upanishad and the Svetaswara Upanishad confirmed the very appropriate analogy that there are two birds in the same tree. So one bird, he's eating, he's fully engrossed with anxiety and moroseness of the enjoyer of the fruits of the tree. But if in some way he turns his face to his friend, who is the Lord, at once the suffering bird becomes free from anxieties. So the Lord in the heart is there along with the individual soul, but as an observer until the individual soul regains his proper consciousness and turns his face to the Supreme Lord. So now Arjuna has come to that point. He came to that point where he turned his face towards his eternal friend Krishna, and he is understanding Bhagavad Gita as it is from him. They're speaking face to face. And thus, hearing from Krishna, Arjuna can understand the supreme glories of the Lord and be free from his lamentation. And this is another interesting point when people say that, oh, Krishna, this is mythological, Krishna didn't really exist, or, that the Lord is not really a person, it's just an analogy. But no, this is reality. Therefore, Bhagavad Gita as it is. And Krishna was standing there face to face with Arjuna. They were having a conversation. And Prabhupada explained that we can also have a conversation with Krishna as we find ourselves detached from the material energy and from material desires and desirous of turning ourselves back to Krishna. So in the Varaha Purana, the living entities are described as being the separated parts and parcels of the Supreme, and they're eternally so, according to the Bhagavad Gita, that we're never going to be anything other than what we are, the tiny part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. We're never going to become God. We're not God, and we're not going to become God. Some people have that misconception. But no, we're always his individual parts and parcels. So even after being liberated from illusion, the living entity remains a separate identity. And this is very clearly taught by Krishna to Arjuna. And in doing so, Arjuna became liberated from his ignorance by the knowledge that he received from Krishna. But he never became one with Krishna. Sometimes it's said, okay, we become one with the Supreme Lord. But the oneness a devotee is experiencing is to be one in accord, that we're following the instructions of Krishna. And that way there's oneness, but not that we merge into Krishna and we become Krishna. That's never going to happen. So after the liberation from the material contamination, the atomic soul may prefer to remain as a spiritual spark in the effulgent rays of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In other words, remain within the Brahmajyoti, but the intelligent souls enter into the spiritual planets to associate personally with Krishna. And everything is coming from Krishna, and therefore everything is connected to Krishna. This is Krishna Sambandha. But there's different levels, there's different degrees. So the impersonal effulgent rays of Krishna are certainly part of Krishna. And Prabhupada says, thus, the impersonalists are also partially Krishna conscious. And then the localized super soul is likewise connected to Krishna, only much more so than the effulgence. And thus, those persons are also partially Krishna conscious, but it's only the bhaktas, the fully surrendered souls, who are fully Krishna conscious. And then Prabhupada described the word sarvagata, all pervading. And he said, this is significant because living entities are all over God's creation. And they're living in the land, in the water, in the air, within the earth, even within fire. And the belief that they are sterilized in fire means not able to live isn't acceptable, because it's stated that the soul cannot be burned by fire. So therefore, there's no doubt that there are living entities also in the sun planet with suitable bodies to live there. Just like we see the fish in the sea, great vast sea. We couldn't, if we fell into the sea, we wouldn't last long. But the fish, he is happily living in the sea. And if he was removed, he would not last long. So in the same way, there's also entities that have bodies that can withstand very great degrees of heat. I was in, it was Yellowstone Park one year. I was taking a kind of scenic detour. And we came upon this, I was with a group of devotee ladies. We had been going on the Rath Yatra tour. So it was the final end of the tour. So we were heading back to New Vrindavan. And so we're in the Yellowstone Park, and there was these hot pools of water, and they were over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, something like 1,400 degrees Fahrenheit. And it was very amazing because the scientists had discovered these living microbes or some kind of bacteria living within these incredibly hot springs. Like if anybody would fall into those springs, they'd just be finished. You know, the flesh would melt off their bones. And yet there were living entities within that heat. So even the material scientists can understand that different bodies for different situations, including high heat. So as far as the soul's existence is concerned, no one can establish the existence experimentally beyond the proof of Shruti or the Vedic wisdom. We have to accept this truth because there's no other source of understanding the existence of the soul, although it is a fact and there is perception. Just like when there's a live body, then the soul leaves, there's a dead body, we can understand that the life force has gone, but we haven't seen it. We haven't been able to touch it. So there's many things we have to accept solely on the grounds of superior authority. And accepting that there's two classes of philosophers, one believing in the existence of the soul, one not believing in the existence of soul. In either case, there would be no cause for lamentation because the non-believers in the existence of the soul are called atheists by the followers of Vedic wisdom. But Prabhupada describes it, even if for argument's sake, we accept that atheist theory, there's still no cause for lamentation because apart from the separate existence of the soul, the material elements, they remain unmanifested before creation. So either way, there is no cause for disturbance. And I don't know how many of you might have read Vishaka's book. What is it, 5 years and 11 months? And in the book, she's describing her life prior to coming to Krishna consciousness. She was an avowed atheist. She was born into an atheistic family. And to the degree she actually was preaching atheism, just like Prahlad was teaching Krishna consciousness to the children in his school, Vishaka was teaching atheism, preaching it to her classmates. She had no interest, -0 in God. And yet somehow or other, Krishna had an interest in her. And her boyfriend, who became Yadavar, was in India doing a film project. And he tells her, why don't you come over and join me? And the film project was to film the Hare Krishnas. He had some commission by a magazine, but you know, she would come over, and their idea would that they were going to film the essence of India. Like when she first arrived in Bombay, I remember Jamuna opened the door and Vishaka walks in, and I was there, and I go, oh, you know, why have you come? He goes very seriously, you know, Vishaka, she's quite serious. I have come to film the essence of India. And I go, oh, you've come to the right place. But we could see she really had no interest at all. But due to the association of a pure devotee, Srila Prabhupada, and his expertise, he never pounded on her. He never even tried to argue her into believing, but he just spoke always of the truth. And at one point, when the filming of the Krishnas was done, Prabhupada asked what they were going to do, and he goes, well, we'd like to go to a village and film village life, like the essence of India. And Prabhupada laughed. He goes, well, if you go to in some village, they're just going to steal your cameras. They don't speak your language. You don't speak their language, But if you want to go somewhere, go to Vrindavan. And that's Prabhupada's expertise. Sending someone to the right place at the right time. And it was there in Vrindavan that Vishaka gradually transformed from an atheist into a believer. And in Vrindavan, she was initiated by and married on the same day by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. And then a little while later in Mayapur, she received Gayatri Mantra. So it's from atheist to Brahmin, Krishna Bhakta Brahmin. So this is a wonderful Krishna and wonderful Srila Prabhupada. So Vedic wisdom encourages self-realization on the basis of the non-existence of the material body. It's there, but briefly. So whether one believes in the existence of the soul or doesn't believe in the existence of the soul, no cause for lamentation for loss of the body. And then there's that really wonderful, beautiful verse. I mean, there's been songs written about this. Some look on the soul as amazing, some describe him as amazing, and some hear of him as amazing, while others, even after hearing about him, cannot understand him at all. So illusioned by the material energy, people become so engrossed in subject matter for sense gratification that they have very little time to understand the questions of self-understanding or self-realization, even though it's a fact that without this understanding, all activities result in ultimate defeat in the struggle for existence. We just cannot, control material nature. We can't put it in its place. It's a losing battle. Now, some people who are inclined to hear about the soul, and they may be attending lectures in good association, but due to ignorance, they also are misguided by the acceptance of the super soul and the atomic soul as one without distinction in magnitude. In other words, they're thinking, well, all is one, and they don't understand the distinction between the greater soul, the Supreme Lord, and the tiny atomic soul, and their respective functions, and then the relationship and all other major and minor details. So it's even more difficult to find a person who's actually derived full benefit from knowledge of the soul and who's able to describe the position of the soul in the different aspects. But somehow or other, if one's able to understand the subject matter of the soul, then one's life is successful. So the easiest process for understanding the subject matter of the self is to accept the statements of the Bhagavad Gita. And Prabhupada mentions in the purport that it requires a great deal of penance and sacrifice, either in this life or in previous lives, before one is able to accept Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But Krishna can be known by the causeless mercy of the pure devotee and in no other way. And I think that's what happened to Vishaka also, because this causeless mercy of Srila Prabhupada just went beyond her brain and the knowledge that she was very carefully and, filing away. And in the same way, we can also affect other persons. If we stick to Krishna's words, to Prabhupada's words, and we give them this beautiful knowledge and these beautiful teachings, we can chip away at that hardcore covering that's causing the living entity to be bewildered and distanced from the absolute truth. And the authority of Krishna, one has to believe there's a soul different from the material body. Not that there's no such thing as a soul, or that the living symptoms start at a certain stage of material maturity and result as an interaction of chemicals. I mean, even to this day, we know people are trying to put things together in a laboratory to create life. And now there's even so many ways to, we can't create life, but using what Krishna has provided, the scientists try to put things together and think they have achieved something. But the soul is totally aloof from such imaginative creations. So the soul is immortal, and violence isn't encouraged. But at the same time, we see in Bhagavad Gita that neither is war discouraged when there's an actual need for it. And that need must be justified in terms of the sanction of the Lord, not some capricious mental idea or some personal self-concocted philosophy. And one of the important points that was coming up also was about doing one's duty. So yoga involves controlling the senses. Arjuna's proposal not to fight was based on sense gratification, because he was uncomfortable with the idea, fighting. So he was forgetting his prime duty, and he wanted to cease fighting because he thought that by not killing his relatives and kinsmen, he would be happier than by enjoying this kingdom, by conquering the cousins and the brothers, etc. But Prabhupada pointed out either way, the basic principles were for sense gratification. And happiness derived from conquering them and happiness derived by seeing kinsmen alive were both on the basis of personal sense gratification. So then one of the wonderful, it's very reassuring that in this endeavor, there's no loss or diminution, and a little advancement on this path can protect one from the most dangerous type of fear. Now, it's explained how activity in Krishna consciousness or acting for the benefit of Krishna without expectation of sense gratification. This is the highest transcendental quality of work. So even a small endeavor, a small beginning of such activity finds no impediment, or can that small beginning be lost at any stage? Anywhere on the material plane has to be completed. Otherwise, it's just considered a failure. Like maybe you start to go to college and you drop out, like a lot of us from my generation did. But the working, so you don't get your degree, you don't succeed. But work that is begun in Krishna consciousness has a permanent effect, even when it's not completed. Never a loss, never diminution. One time, a young devotee, well, not a devotee yet, but this young man, he began coming to the temple in San Francisco. And he started, first it was kind of showing up at lunchtime or breakfast time, but then he started showing up at other times. And then he actually bought a Bhagavatam and began reading it. And there was a program that we had attempted to make a grand program, in fact, but it didn't come out as grand as we thought because there was hardly anybody attended the grand program that we had planned. We had rented a really nice hall as opposed to some of the little, backroom Haight-Ashbury type of hippie dives. We had got this beautiful place and we thought we did a great job of advertising. But when we got there with Srila Prabhupada, there was hardly anybody. And at the same time, Srila Prabhupada stood up on the lecture stage and he spoke magnificently as if the whole place was packed. I mean, it was a very nice place. It was sloped, there was a stage, there was padded chairs, practically empty. So after he spoke, he goes, "So are there any questions?" So this Bhakti raised his hand, Bhakta Tam, and he asked Prabhupada, what happens if you begin this process of Krishna consciousness but somehow you're not able to complete it, or you don't finish it. And so Prabhupada gave this answer. He said, and he also gave the example, like, you know, the mundane material bank account, you put your money in, and if you take some out, then you're going to have a reduced bank account. But he said, in your spiritual bank account, you cannot reduce it. You may stop your Krishna consciousness at a certain percentage, but as soon as you return, whether this life or the next, you will begin precisely from that moment where you left off. So he said to the person, is that okay? And the person, yeah, he appreciated that answer. And then that person actually went on to become initiated, and he got the name Tamal Krishna. He became Tamal Krishna Goswami. On another morning walk, he was walking with Srila Prabhupada by Stowe Lake in Golden Gate Park. He goes, so are there any other pure devotees like you on the planet? And Prabhupada turned to Upendra, who was on the other side, goes, how many of us are there? And Upendra said, oh, about 34, 35. And so Prabhupada turns back, he says, about 34 or 35, you know. So suddenly we were thinking, wow, we're all pure devotees, not realizing there was graduations, just like when you have a student, you have a preschooler, you have your kindergarten, you have your grade school, middle school, high school, college, postgrad, PhD. Everyone's a student, but different levels, you know. So Prabhupada, at that point, he said, yeah, all of his students were pure devotees, but he also defined anyone who is following the instruction of the spiritual master is a pure devotee. So when one is situated in Krishna consciousness, all the activities are on the absolute plane, because then they're no longer subject to dualities like good, bad, you know. The highest perfection of Krishna consciousness is to just give up the material conception of life. And this is automatically achieved by, Prabhupada described, progressive Krishna consciousness, that the resolute purpose of a person in Krishna consciousness is based on knowledge. Vasudevam Sarvam Iti Samahatma Sudalabhaha. So one must be intelligent enough to understand the purpose of the Vedas without being attached to the rituals aimed at higher levels of sense gratification, because a great portion of the Vedas is aimed at sense gratification, but with restrictions. The other day, Prabhupada was giving a class I was listening to, and it was he said, Krishna consciousness means restrictions, that we want to restrict our senses from sense gratification. So in the Vedas, there's many things that are there that you can do that we don't do, because it's aimed at restricting the senses, like meat eating, for example, you know. And it's not possible for the common man in this age to follow all the rules and regulations of Vedic rituals and the injunctions of the Vedas and the Upanishads. Prabhupada said it takes so much time and energy, knowledge, resources to execute the purpose of the Vedas, so it's hardly possible in this age. So then the best purpose of the Vedic culture is served by chanting the holy names of the Lord, as recommended by Lord Chaitanya, the deliverer of all the fallen souls in this age. So right now, this may be a politically incorrect thing to mention, but I'm going to do it anyway. Right now, it's Purushottam Mas, and many devotees are trying to follow this. I had a young girl, she's just newly arrived in Krishna consciousness, and she texted me yesterday, I'm getting confused about what should I eat, what should I do or not do for Purushottam Mas. And I asked her, well, why don't you consider this? This Purushottam Mas was never mentioned by Prabhupada in any of his purports, any of his lectures, any of his letters, any of his conversations, etc. What he did mention quite consistently was chanting 16 good rounds. So I said, are you chanting 16 good rounds? She goes, well, I know she chants 16 rounds, actually. We should try. She's like almost 14, young girl. Goes, well, I said, well, try chanting 16 good rounds, and then you'll get full benefits. So this is the thing, is like sometimes we get a little distracted by different rituals or purposes that are mentioned, rightly so, in different literature, and even recommended by acharyas. But we should keep in mind, for us, if we can chant 16 good rounds, that will elevate us beyond anything other than we think we might achieve by following some other process or procedure. In other words, my point is, stick to what Prabhupada has given us. And that is the best way for us to make advancement. So except for work in Krishna consciousness, except for the work in Krishna consciousness, all activities are abominable because they continually bind the worker to the cycle of birth or death. And he says, misers don't know how to utilize their assets, which they acquire by good fortune or hard labor. So one should therefore spend our energies working in Krishna consciousness to make our lives successful. So like the misers, usually we think of misers are like penny pitchers, but in our understanding, misers are those unfortunate persons who don't employ their human energy in the service of the Lord. And the ignorance can be removed by the instruction of the Bhagavad Gita, which is teaching us how to surrender to Lord Krishna in all respects and become liberated from the chained victimization of action and reaction, birth and death, birth and death. And if we can reach the platform of understanding by service to the Supreme Lord Krishna, then we don't have to worry about executing different types of penances and sacrifices that are mentioned in the revealed scriptures. And similarly, if we don't understand that the purpose of the Vedas is to reach Krishna and we simply engage in rituals, then again, we're uselessly wasting time in such engagements. So the Krishna consciousness, one comes directly into communion with Krishna, and thus all directions from Krishna can be understood in that transcendental state. And one is sure to achieve the results by such activities and obtain conclusive knowledge. Only we have to carry out Krishna's orders, ours representative, the spiritual master. And of course, nowadays there are so many interpretations of everything, including what Prabhupada had to instruct. But if we just keep ourselves simple, and as it says in this verse, give up all varieties of sense desire which arise from mental concoction, then when the mind finds satisfaction in the self alone, then we can be situated in pure transcendental consciousness. And anyone, therefore, who's fully engaged in Krishna consciousness, our devotional service to the Lord, automatically has all the good qualities of the great sages, whereas a person who is not so situated has no good qualities. And of course, that may sound a little bit harsh, maybe, to some people, just, well, wait a minute. But why is that being said? It's because one who is not connecting to Krishna or the Supreme Lord, where you can connect, the Christians can connect through Christ, others can connect, but to connect with God, to become a lover of God, if we just stick to our own mental concoctions and our own ideas of righteousness and morality and goodness, then we just remain complicit in mental concoctions, and we remain in this material conditioned state. And therefore, it's said that, and Prabhupada used in the purport, he said, it's rightly said herein that one has to give up all kinds of desires, sense desire manufactured by the mental concoction. But obviously that is an easier said than done. And therefore the Krishna consciousness movement is very nice because there is opportunity for 24 hours of engagement by using whatever abilities Krishna has given us in Krishna service. And I think that during this particular era, this last few months that we've been in, I've seen amazing efforts by devotees in serving Krishna and assisting others in serving Krishna and preaching Krishna consciousness, because the normal situation that we've grown used to, you know, the carpet has been pulled out from under our feet. So Krishna's ability of man, and devotees are very enterprising and are using the ability that Krishna has given them to reach out in wonderful transcendental ways, just like here we're having this Zoom get together. And we're actually being able to continue to spread this Krishna consciousness movement. And not only the Hare Krishna people are doing this, other religious organizations have also found the same thing that's going on after the initial, you know, what do we do now? And the initial panic, have become connected to using the means available, which in this case is internet. And in doing so, connecting ourselves and others to Krishna. So the transcendently situated person actually has no sense desires resulting from petty materialism. That's the last sentence in the purport. Rather, he remains happy in his natural position of eternally serving the Supreme Lord. And in our case, in trying to engage others also in Krishna's eternal service. Okay. So can I give a little plug for
Yes.
For the new book?
Yes, please.
So I don't know, can you see this? Like, it's A Bond of Love, Srila Prabhupada and his daughters. And this is a wonderful book that is only dealing with the subject matter of the relationship between Srila Prabhupada and his spiritual daughters. Because most of the information has come largely from the side of the men, but there's now been a wonderful, we can say, a transcendental spiritual competition and emergence. This is another book that's out by Pranada and others, Emergence of the Women's Voice in ISKCON. But the women's voices are being heard, or at least they're being offered. And this book is more of a documentary. It's not a life story book. It's a book of individual experiences with Srila Prabhupada by his spiritual daughters. And there's 595 pages, 305 interviews. So it's a very well-packed book, and it's available on Amazon.com, and it's only $19.95. And it's not a book you have to read all in one shot, although you certainly can do it. It's the inspiration behind the book came at a time in 2008 when there had been some very online reactions to some of the controversial statements that occasionally arise. And I was feeling, not only myself, but others were feeling very perturbed that Srila Prabhupada could be criticized without being understood. And the one thing I understood is that you just can't put out these kind of fires one by one. They're not going to listen to you. If you say, no, that's not right. It's not, they're not going to listen. But what people do respond to is personal experience. So I felt that if people would hear from Srila Prabhupada's daughters themselves, our experience, then they could understand how Srila Prabhupada was certainly a transcendentally wonderful spiritual father, and certainly had no ill will whatsoever towards ladies. So A Bond of Love, Srila Prabhupada and his daughters. Recommended reading, if you will. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much. Wow. Well, we look forward to getting that book, and we'll get some for our bookstore.
Yeah, you can order from Maya Priya. If you message me, I can send you how to connect with her.
Okay.
And you can either order from her. Myself, Paishori, and Vishaka began, the initial push. We had others who helped in transcribing. We were doing interviews, and Vishaka was editing. Kashori was advising. I was probably the main interviewer, but then others did step up. And other people helped, as I said, with transcribing. But then we got to a point, everything was there, but we didn't know what to do with it or how to do it. And Krishna sent Maya Priya, who is a Prabhupada disciple that lives in Virginia, and she and her husband for about 25 years have had a steady, ongoing college preaching program. But she also has a book publishing company. So she knew about this, and she contacted us and said, what's happening? It's been like 20 years since this project happened. Where's it going? And she picked it up and pushed it home, got all the things put together, and chose Amazon as the printer distributor because it was the cheapest. We are not interested in making money. If we were, it wouldn't be 1995. We want our inner desire to stick that information out about Srila Prabhupada. Let people find out how wonderful Srila Prabhupada was to his spiritual daughters. And let them just see how such personality could transform the lives of so many.
That's nice. Thank you. Thank you for bringing that up. I also know that I think there are a number of smiles that came up when you began to speak about Mother Vishaka's book.
Yeah.
Because every Thursday night we have a Srila Prabhupada reading night. We pick a book. We read a book. This is organized by Vishnu Prabhu. A book by one of Srila Prabhupada's disciples that he's written, that they've written, and then we go through it. And right now we're reading Mother Vishaka's book. So I know out there are a bunch of the devotees who are relishing you, telling that story, because we're right in the middle of it right now.
Okay.
And then you're referenced in there quite often, and to be able to hear from you and see you today, and then kind of just draw that connection about how, it's just so amazing to have, contact with people that have been there and through those experiences. I always say it's like, you're talking to people out of the history books, and it's really an honor, and it's just very relishable, to be able to see you and hear from you, and talk to these wonderful devotees.
Maybe at one point, this would be a really big read. Like I say, it's 595 pages. But maybe you could do it in some sections, and maybe dedicate a few. You do that once a week, so maybe dedicate a few weeks to just taking a portion and reading through and meeting these wonderful Vaishnavis and hearing from them of their amazing experiences with this divine grace.
Oh,
yes.
Good.
One more thing I just want to mention before there may be some other devotees that want to open up. Thank you for mentioning about the Purushottama month.
I know that could have been a pretty sensitive, but if we want to be connected with Prabhupada, then we should connect ourselves with his direct teachings and weed out those things that are, it's not that there's anything wrong. I'm not criticizing, but I'm saying, you know, we've got a short time to go, these many of us. And even if you think you've got another 50 years around, you know, you're probably already finding, like, you know, it's not so easy to chant 16 offensive rounds. So why not work on what he's given us and perfect that instead of taking a detour onto something else?
So nicely said. We weren't sure what to do in Philadelphia as far as how to advertise this, promote Purushottama month. A lot of devotees were talking about it. As you said, the young lady came to you and was wondering what to do. And I went on to Vanipedia and I was Googling, trying to find what Srila Prabhupada said on it. We couldn't find anything. It was like nothing.
Right.
You know? And thinking, okay, maybe it has another name, Adhika Mas, and it's still nothing. And I asked some of the local Srila Prabhupada disciples, you know, Vishnu Gurab Prabhu, Balabhadra Prabhu, you know, what did they do, you know, in the 70s, you know, during Purushottama Mas? And they said, you know, the same thing we do every day. You know, we wake up for Mangalarti, chant our japa, go to Bhagavatam class, go on Sankirtan, but there was nothing. So, like you said, it's always, you know, you don't want to downplay, you know, people that are, you know, trying, you know, maybe chanting an extra round or extra rounds or reading more. But thank you for bringing the emphasis that we don't, you know, bringing it back to, you know, the chanting of the holy names, and, you know, focus. Srila Prabhupada didn't, you know, seem to give any special consideration for this month.
Yeah, like you said, you can't find one reference.
Yeah. So, thank you. There's some other devotees that may want to also to speak.
Well, all right, Mother. Hare Krishna, Mother.
Haribol.
Please accept my humble obeisance as all glories to Srila Prabhupada. So it was so enlivening. You went so far and so much, and you really drove home the point. I was very, very inspired because basically, you know, we're geared up towards sense gratification. No matter what concoction, what the combination is, it's towards sense gratification. And we've come to Krishna consciousness because we're looking for something else, self-realization. So we have to change the consciousness. And it appears that be it a new person or ourselves, you know, these concoctions, it just seems to come back. This desire to enjoy the senses just appears to be so strong, even when we no longer can utilize them properly, you know, they're done. But the desire.
Yeah.
But in purport, Prabhupada said that, but the engagement in Krishna consciousness, for that you don't have to do devotional service. You don't have to do anything extraneously. Just do devotional service.
He says, without hesitation. That was something I read. Engage in Krishna consciousness without hesitation.
It's amazing. And I was feeling like that. I was thinking, but we hesitate. We hesitate when there's some concoction that we think about, you know? And as I said, we're too old for gross sense gratification. But these mental concoctions of this idea of enjoying separately from Krishna, it's just there. And I just felt the gravity of it as you were speaking. It could cost us so much this lifetime. And I just appreciated hearing you speak. I love the idea that you put in a plug for the book. I think it's wonderful. I think it's nice to have a reference when we're preaching, when the women in Krishna consciousness can explain why they're so grounded and can express the loving relationship they've experienced from Srila Prabhupada. It has weight, you know. So that too, I thought was very, very wonderful and profound. We'll get the books.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mother.
So It's about
Okay.
6. I have to move on to my next engagement.
We are so grateful. We are so grateful that you shared your time with us tonight.
I want to say that I was very happy to see you last time when you came here, and I am happy to see you again. And it really, I liked your story about Vishakha Devi. You summarized it very well, and I learned a lot from your class. Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Going back to Haryaswa's point about, you think you're going to get older and you're going to lose your taste for sense gratification. It just becomes a little more subtle, but the same indulgence is there. I mean, just think about it. When you're going into the temple, right? And you're looking around for the best seat, right? Or something, something, subtle thing. You're looking around for the best seat. Prabhupada gave the example, of an old person and on a deathbed practically. So they brought, the person brought in his young daughter, and then the old man was about dying. He got like, whoa, a little like, seeing a young girl, it became a little, animated. Couldn't do anything. One time I had a friend, and she was some kind of a nursing assistant type of thing. And so there was a really old man, like maybe 89 or 87 years old, but he had been a former rear admiral in the Navy. He had been in charge of a great big, huge Navy battleship. It was a big guy. And now he was like in a wheelchair with tubes in his nose and everywhere else. And she was a young girl. He would come in, when she'd come in, he'd look at her. And sometimes, like she was trying to change a tube or something, he would like touch her hand, touch her arm. He'd go, oh, so soft. Oh, so pretty. It was like creepy for her. But you understand, the body was kaput, finished, but the desire was still there. We have to scrub hard through the chanting of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna,
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare,
Hare Rama,
Hare
Hare
Rama.
Rama, Hare Hare.
Thank you, Mother.
Even you get sick. I was kind of like, after I came back from India last year, I had this cough and it wouldn't go away. And it just would not go away. And I was laughing. It's my new sense gratification. Coughing is new sense gratification. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. If you need to end, we understand you have to go to another program. I have a few announcements for the Philadelphia community. This is actually the time when the temple opens. We do a darshan in the evening, so a lot of people who are listening are now on their way to the temple. We do have darshan and kirtan tonight. But just a couple announcements I want to make for the devotees.
If I send you, like right now, and I can send you the link to order the books, and is there some way you could share that with others?
Yes,
Okay.
we can definitely do that.
I'll send it on your WhatsApp.
What's that? Perfect.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
I'll go to Srila Prabhupada. Okay. Just a couple quick announcements for the devotees that are out there. I hope you really enjoyed that class. It was very special, and we thank Mother Malati so much. Next Sunday begins the Sunday school for the children. So all the parents out there, please spread the word. There'll be an email going out in just a day or two about it. So next Sunday at 5:30, the Sunday school will begin. It'll be done over Zoom. If you have children from the ages of 3 years old to 12th grade, we have space for you in these classes. I think there's 4 total classes. Based on your age group, you'll be put into the appropriate class. Registration and payment will be online, so please look out for that, coming in your email in just a few days. We also want to thank our Sunday Feast sponsors today. We have two Sunday Feast sponsors. We have Rohit and Himani, and they're sponsoring For the Pleasure of the Lord and His devotees during the Purushottama month. So let's please thank them, and we're going to chant for both of them in just a second. And the other is Dr. Ashish Rana and his sister Gopi Rana, and they're sponsoring on the death anniversary of their mother Uma Rana. So for these two families, please let's chant the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And if anybody would like to, even though we're in COVID time, we still do these, people are still able to sponsor the Sunday Feast. As mentioned earlier in the class, I don't know if you know, but if and some of you have already experienced it, but we serve Al Prasadam, roughly 100 people a week. It's all takeout. We're not sitting in to do it. We pack it in very nice, environmentally friendly packages, containers, all recyclable materials, and we pack it for the devotees to come home. They can have it at home with their families. We do ask for that you RSVP for this, so we know exactly how much to make. We don't want to waste anything. At the same time, we want to make sure that we're able to serve everybody who is interested. Another announcement is something that we've begun during the Purushottama month, is that we started a morning japa group. It is on Zoom, the same Zoom link. It's from 6:30 to 7:30. We thought it would be a nice time for devotees to come together and chant. This actually should be something that's done throughout the year, but when we were trying to plan it, we said, okay, let's just start. This would be an auspicious time to start it. So we started last Thursday. And I think we're finding that devotees, they need some association with their chanting. Especially during the COVID time, we're not seeing each other. People are more lonely. They're not getting the live interaction with one another. And this is an opportunity for us to come together and keeping the holy name in the center and chant. So we've picked a time from 6:30 a.m. to 7:30 a.m. Actually, we go up to 7:50 a.m., which is the time for our Srimad Bhagavatam class. So it just rolls into our Bhagavatam class. But anytime, if you can come on at 6:30, try it out and join the devotees as we chant. Also, I wanted to mention that maybe this time doesn't work for you. Maybe you would like to do a different time. If you would like to organize a japa session for devotees to come together, we have the facility to do that. We have the virtual space to do that. So we have a Zoom channel, and we can organize other times throughout the day. So there may be a group that wants to gather midday and chant, or maybe in the early evening and chant. If you're interested, please reach out to me and we can arrange for something like that. With that, we're going to conclude for this evening. Every morning, if you want to continue to hear with us, we study Srimad Bhagavatam starting at 7:50. Again, japa starts at 6:30 a.m., the same Zoom channel. And for those that will be coming by tonight, we look forward to seeing you. Okay, Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.